The oak table groaned beneath Erith Jorah's elbow, and across from her, the seventh suitor of the evening turned crimson as his knuckles slammed into the scarred wood. She released his hand immediately, grinning as the crowd around the clearing roared approval, coins changing hands among the wagering uncles and cousins who lined the torchlit space like a living wall. Her clan knew how this went. Every autumn gathering, every year since she had turned 18 three harvests past, suitors came to try their luck, and every autumn she sent them home with bruised pride and aching forearms. Next. Her father bellowed from his place beside the table, his own tusks gleaming in the firelight as he gestured broadly at the remaining hopefuls. Erith rolled her shoulders, feeling the pleasant burn of exertion in her muscles, and planted her elbow again. The autumn air carried the smell of roasting venison and applewood smoke, and somewhere beyond the circle, a fiddle had started up, impatient for the real dancing to begin once this ritual concluded. The eighth man approached. Orc, broad as a barrel, with arms like tree trunks and a confidence that made the crowd quiet with interest. Torak, she remembered, from the northern holdings where they bred war horses and prided themselves on strength. He sat across from her with a nod of respect, positioned his elbow and clasped her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip solid. "Ready?" her father asked. They both nodded. The grip tightened. Erith felt Torak's strength immediately, a genuine challenge that made her focus sharpen. The crowd held its breath. For 3 seconds the match was even, their locked hands trembling at the vertical, and then Erith found her angle and drove his knuckles down in a smooth, inexorable arc. The crack of bone on wood punctuated another victory. Torak stood, rubbing his wrist, and offered her a rueful grin. "You are stronger than you look, Erith Jorah." "I look pretty strong," she replied, flexing her arm for effect, and the crowd laughed. Torak retreated to accept a consolation cup of mead, and Erith scanned the remaining suitors. 2 more orcs, both looking suddenly less confident. And at the very end of the line, standing slightly apart as though he might bolt at any moment, a human. Her eyebrows rose. Humans came to these gatherings sometimes, traders or travelers passing through the borderlands, but rarely did they approach the suitors' table. The social lines between orc and human were not absolute here in the frontier territories, but they existed, invisible and firm as stone walls. Orc women married orc men. Human women married human men. The exceptions were rare enough to be scandalous, discussed in whispers and disapproving shakes of the head. She studied him as the 9th suitor, a local boy she had known since childhood, took his place across from her. The human was tall for his kind, perhaps 6 feet, with dark hair that fell past his collar and a lean build that spoke of hard work rather than excess. He wore simple clothes, a farmer's rough spun shirt and patched trousers, and his hands, she noticed as he fidgeted with them, were heavily scarred across the knuckles. His face was angular, almost gaunt, and he watched the proceedings with dark eyes that seemed to absorb everything without judgment. The 9th suitor went down in 15 seconds. The 10th, who had been boasting earlier about his time in the border guard, lasted slightly longer before Erith planted his hand firmly into the waiting wood. The crowd's energy was rising now, anticipation building toward the inevitable conclusion. Her father raised his arms, ready to declare the trial complete, and Erith opened her mouth to agree. "One more," a voice said, quiet enough that it barely carried over the ambient noise. The human had stepped forward. The crowd quieted instantly, conversations cutting off mid-word as every head turned. Erith saw her father's expression freeze somewhere between confusion and disapproval. She saw her mother's hand go to her mouth. Around the circle, Her cousins and aunts and uncles stared with varying degrees of shock. "You want to try?" Erith asked, keeping her voice neutral. Up close, she could see the human was older than she had first guessed, perhaps 25 or 26, with fine lines around his eyes that suggested either humor or hardship. His gaze met hers directly, unflinching despite the attention now fixed upon him. "If you will allow it," he said. His voice was low, roughened by something she could not name. Exhaustion, perhaps, or simple disuse. Her father was shaking his head, but Erith waved him off. "The trial is open to any suitor," she said clearly, speaking to the crowd as much as to her father. "Any suitor who wishes to try." She positioned her elbow and extended her hand, palm open. "What is your name?" "Jonathan Ashford." He sat across from her, moving with a careful economy that suggested old injuries or chronic pain, and placed his elbow beside hers. His hand slid into her grip, and Erith felt the roughness of scars, the lean strength of tendon and bone without much padding. He was not weak, she judged, but he was not a match for her either. She had beaten men twice his size. "Ready?" her father asked, his voice tight with disapproval. Jonathan nodded. Erith nodded. Their hands tightened together and something shifted in her chest, a flutter like a caught breath. His eyes were on hers, dark and steady, and in them she saw something unexpected. Not hope of victory, not arrogance or pride. Just a quiet, weary courage, as though he had long since learned to expect nothing but kept trying anyway. The match began. Erith felt his resistance, genuine but insufficient, as their locked hands tilted slowly toward her side of the table. She could end it in a moment. She had the leverage, the power, the technique. And then, for reasons she could not articulate even to herself, she eased her strength and let their hands drift back to vertical. Let them hover there, trembling with effort that was suddenly no longer feigned. The crowd's murmur rose, confused. Jonathan's eyes widened slightly, questioning, but he did not speak. Erith felt her pulse hammering in her throat. She thought of the 7, the 8, the 9, the 10 suitors she had beaten tonight alone, the dozens over the years. The expectation that she would marry a proper orc man, someone strong and suitable, someone her parents approved. The slow, grinding certainty that none of them had ever made her feel anything beyond friendly competition. She let her arm bend. Let Jonathan's hand push hers, centimeter by careful centimeter, toward the table. She felt the shock ripple through the watching clan like a physical wave, gasps and shouts of disbelief, her father's strangled noise of protest. Jonathan's hand was shaking. Whether from effort or confusion she could not tell, but he did not stop, and she did not resist. And together they descended at a pace so slow it was unmistakably deliberate until her knuckles touched the wood. The clearing exploded into chaos. Her father was on his feet, shouting. Her mother stood frozen, one hand still pressed to her mouth. Cousins were arguing, voices climbing over each other. Jonathan released her hand as though it had burned him, jerking back in his seat, his face gone pale with shock. "What did you do?" Someone yelled, and Erith could not tell if they were addressing her or Jonathan or the universe at large. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her, and the crowd parted without conscious thought, an automatic yielding to the implications of what they had just witnessed. In the old traditions, which everyone claimed were merely formality now but which everyone still knew by heart, a loss in the suitor's trial was not merely a loss. It was an acceptance, a declaration, a public commitment before clan and earth and sky. Jonathan was still staring at her, his expression moving through shock toward dawning comprehension. "I do not understand," he said, barely audible under the clamor. "Neither do I," Erith admitted, and the honesty of it made her want to laugh or weep or both. She had just bound herself, before everyone she knew, to a human stranger without property or prospects. And she could not explain why except that for one moment, looking into his exhausted, hopeful, hopeless eyes, she had wanted to. Her father pushed through the crowd and grabbed her arm, not roughly but firmly. Inside, now. His face was mottled green and red with anger or fear or both. "We will discuss this." "There is nothing to discuss," Erith said, finding her voice and her spine together. "The trial is witnessed. The traditions are clear." "The traditions are for our people," her father hissed. Not for, he cut himself off, but the gesture toward Jonathan finished the sentence. Jonathan stood, moving carefully as though afraid any sudden motion might shatter the fragile peace. "I should go," he said quietly. "I did not mean to cause trouble. Do not." Erith's voice cracked like a whip and he froze. She turned to her father, to her mother, to the circle of shocked and scandalized faces. "I made my choice, witnessed and binding. If anyone contests it, speak now." For a moment no one did. Then from the back of the crowd a voice rang out cold and clear. "I contest it." The speaker pushed forward and Erith's stomach sank. Gorak. Of course it was Gorak. The northern warrior was massive even by orc standards, with shoulders like a bull and a face that looked carved from granite. He had competed in 3 separate gatherings, losing each time with increasingly poor grace, and his family's wealth and influence had led him to believe persistence would eventually triumph. "The match was false," Gorak said, moving to stand beside the table. His voice carried easily, pitched for the crowd. "She did not fight. I saw her yield. We all saw it." "Then you saw me make my choice," Erith shot back, her hands curling into fists. "A choice to deceive," Gorak said, "to mock the traditions by throwing the match. If you truly favor this human," he loaded the word with contempt, "then prove it was not deception. Face me again. Prove your loss was real." The crowd's energy shifted, uncertainty rippling through it. Erith felt the trap closing. If she refused, Gorak would claim she feared facing him honestly, that her loss to Jonathan was theater. If she accepted, and won, as she surely would, the loss to Jonathan would be voided by demonstration that she retained her full strength. If she accepted and let Gorak win, she would be forsworn and humiliated, her choice to Jonathan revealed as meaningless. "She does not have to prove anything," Jonathan said, his quiet voice somehow cutting through the noise. He had not moved from his position beside the table, but something in his stance had changed, a subtle squaring of the shoulders. "The trial is complete. The traditions do not include provisions for rematches." Gorak turned to him with a look of such withering disdain that several people winced. "The traditions do not include provisions for humans either. You have no standing here, Outlander." "Then I will make this simple," Jonathan said. His voice was still quiet, but something in it made Erith think of deep water, of still surfaces concealing powerful currents. "You claim the match was false. You claim Erith did not truly lose. But I was the one across from her. I felt her strength. And I tell you I won fairly." It was a lie, and everyone knew it was a lie, including Jonathan himself, but the audacity of it struck the crowd silent. Erith stared at him, this strange, quiet human who had appeared from nowhere and was now lying without hesitation to protect a choice she had made for him without asking. Gorak's face darkened to near purple. "You dare." "I dare nothing," Jonathan said. "I state fact. You were not at the table. You did not feel what I felt. Your contest is with your own pride, not with the trial's result." For a terrible moment, Erith thought Gorak would strike him. The big orc's hands clenched, his whole body coiling with violent intent, and Jonathan did not step back or flinch, merely stood there with that awful, weary courage in his eyes. Then her father's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Enough. He stepped between them, one hand raised. Gorak, you have contested and been answered. Jonathan, you have spoken out of turn but not without cause. Erith, he turned to her, and she saw the struggle in his face, anger and confusion and unwilling respect. You have made a choice that I do not understand and do not approve. But it was made before witnesses, and I will not see our traditions twisted to unmake it. Father, Gorak began, but Erith's father silenced him with a look. My word is final in this clan. The trial stands. The result stands. He looked at Erith, then at Jonathan, and she saw resignation settle over him like a heavy cloak. We will speak more on this tomorrow when tempers have cooled. For now, the gathering continues. The trial is concluded. The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly, conversations erupting in hushed, urgent tones as people drifted back toward the fires, and the food and the normality of the festival. Gorak stood frozen for a long moment, his gaze moving between Erith and Jonathan with naked hatred, before he turned and stalked away into the darkness beyond the torchlight. Erith's mother approached, her face unreadable, and touched Erith's cheek gently before walking away without a word. Erith and Jonathan were left standing beside the table in the emptying clearing, the discarded oak surface scarred with decades of knuckle prints and spilled mead. Erith felt suddenly exhausted, the adrenaline draining from her body and leaving her hollow. She sat on the edge of the table and gestured for Jonathan to join her. He did, carefully, maintaining a respectful distance. I should apologize, he said after a moment. I did not know what I was doing. I should not have entered the trial. Why did you? Erith asked. The question had been burning in her mind since he stepped forward. Jonathan was quiet for a long time, his gaze fixed on his scarred hands. I have been working a farmstead about 10 miles west of here, he said finally. A small plot, poor soil. I came to the gathering to trade for seed and perhaps find work for the winter. I saw you at the table, and I saw the way you fought. Not cruel, not mocking, just strong. And I thought, he stopped, swallowed. I thought it had been a long time since I had felt brave enough to try for anything. So I tried. The honesty of it hit her harder than any suitor's best effort. Erith felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. You lied to Gorak, she said. Yes. Why? Because you chose me. Jonathan turned to look at her, and the torchlight caught in his dark eyes, reflecting gold and shadow. I do not know why you did, and I do not pretend to deserve it, but you did. And I will not see you punished for it if I can help. You do not know me, Erith said, almost angry at him for his unreasonable decency. You do not know anything about me. I could be terrible. I could be cruel. I could be using you for some scheme you cannot see. You could be, Jonathan agreed, but I do not think you are. They sat in silence as the festival noise swelled around them, fiddles and drums and laughter weaving together into the familiar soundtrack of autumn gatherings. Erith felt the weight of her choice settling onto her shoulders, not regret, but responsibility. She had claimed this man before her entire clan, and now she would have to make sense of that claim. More than that, she would have to make it true. Where are you staying tonight? She asked finally. I have a bedroll in the traders section. Stay in the guest house, Erith said. It will be warmer, and you will not be bothered by drunks stumbling over you in the dark. Jonathan hesitated, then nodded. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, Erith said, trying for lightness and not quite achieving it. You have just become the most scandalous thing to happen to this clan in a generation. The next few days are going to be difficult. I have survived difficult before, Jonathan said quietly. There was something in the way he said it, a flatness that suggested understatement, and Erith wondered what precisely he had survived. But that was a question for another time, when they had moved past strangers and toward whatever it was they would become. She stood and offered him her hand, the same hand that had gripped his across the table. He took it, and she pulled him to his feet, noting the way he moved, the slight hitch in his left side that spoke of an old injury poorly healed. "Come on," she said. "I will show you where the guest house is, and then I need to face my parents." They walked through the gathering in silence, and Erith felt the weight of every eye that tracked their passage. Whispers followed them like leaves in their wake. By morning, every family within 3 days' travel would know what had happened. Erith Jorah, the strong one, the unbeaten one, had thrown a match to a human stranger. The scandal would burn for months, perhaps years. She found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she did not care as much as she should. The guest house was a small log structure at the edge of the clan compound, simple but well-maintained, with a fireplace and 2 sleeping platforms stacked with furs. Erith lit the fire from a coal she carried in a small clay pot, then showed Jonathan the water barrel and the storage chest with spare blankets. "Will you be all right here?" she asked. "Yes, this is more comfort than I have had in some time." She believed him. There was a quality to the way he looked at the space, a hunger for warmth and safety that spoke volumes about his recent past. "Rest, then. I will come find you in the morning and we will figure out what comes next." "Erith," Jonathan said as she turned to leave. She paused, glancing back. "Thank you. For whatever this is, thank you." She did not know how to answer that, so she simply nodded and stepped out into the night. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and she stood for a moment in the darkness, breathing the cold autumn air and trying to order her spinning thoughts. Then she straightened her shoulders and headed toward her parents' house, ready to face the reckoning she had earned. Her mother was waiting on the porch, arms folded, expression carved from stone. "Inside," she said simply, and Erith followed her into the warmth and lamplight of the main room. Her father sat at the table, a cup of something strong smelling in his hands, and he did not look up as she entered. "Sit," her mother said, and Erith sat. The silence stretched like pulled taffy, thin and unbearable, until her father finally raised his head. "Explain," he said. Just the one word, but it carried the weight of expectation and disappointment and baffled confusion. "I do not know if I can," Erith said honestly. I looked at him and I felt something. A pull. A sense that this was important, that he was important, so I made a choice. "Based on a feeling," her mother said flatly. "You bound yourself to a human stranger based on a feeling." "Yes." Her father's fist hit the table, rattling the cup. "Do you understand what you have done, the questions this raises, the talk this will cause?" "Yes." "Do you care?" Erith met his eyes, seeing the hurt beneath the anger, and softened her voice. "I care that it troubles you. I care that it disrupts the clan, but I do not regret it, father. Not yet. Perhaps I will, but not yet." "He has nothing," her mother said, her voice tight. "No land, no family, no prospects. You could have any man in 3 territories. Gorak alone could offer you wealth and standing. Gorak is a brute who cannot accept refusal," Erith said sharply. "And I do not want wealth and standing. I want," she stopped, struggling for words. "I want someone who looks at me like I am a choice, not a prize. Someone who has courage enough to stand in front of a hostile crowd and lie to protect a stranger who just upended his life." Her parents exchanged a look, some silent communication passing between them. Her father sighed and drank deeply from his cup. "You are 21 years old," he said finally. "A woman grown by any measure. I cannot forbid this, even if I wished to. But I can tell you that the path you have chosen will be hard. People will not accept this easily. There will be challenges, and not all of them as straightforward as Gorak's. I know. Do you?" Her mother leaned forward, her face intense. Do you truly understand what it means to bind your life to someone outside our people? The children you might have will be caught between worlds, belonging fully to neither. The humans will call them half-breeds. Some of our own will shun them. Is that what you want? The question landed like a blow because Erith had not thought that far ahead. She had been operating on instinct, on the bright, burning moment of recognition when Jonathan's hand met hers. The long consequences had not entered her mind, but they were entering now, spreading before her like a map of difficult terrain. I want a chance to find out if what I felt tonight was real, she said quietly. If it is not, if Jonathan and I discover we are unsuited, then we can part ways before any vows are formalized. But if it is real, then yes, I want it. Even with the difficulties, even with the cost. Her mother's face softened slightly, the stone cracking to reveal worry beneath. You always were stubborn, she said, a note of reluctant affection creeping into her voice. Even as a child, when you decided you wanted something, there was no moving you. She gets it from you, Erith's father muttered, and her mother shot him a look that might have been annoyance or agreement or both. Bring him to share breakfast with us tomorrow, her mother said finally. If we are to have a human in the family, I suppose we should meet him properly. And Erith, she waited until Erith looked at her directly. Be careful. Not all humans are kind. You do not know what he has done or what he is running from. I will be careful, Erith promised. She stood, feeling the emotional exhaustion of the night settling into her bones. Thank you for hearing me. I know this is not what you wanted. What we want is for you to be happy, her father said gruffly. We simply thought we knew what that would look like. Perhaps we were wrong. Erith crossed to him and kissed the top of his head, breathing in the familiar smell of pipe smoke and wool. Then she hugged her mother, feeling the tight grip of arms that had held her since infancy, and slipped out into the night once more. The festival was winding down now, the fires burning lower, the music growing sporadic. She walked through the compound, nodding to relatives who watched her pass with expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval, and found herself heading back toward the guest house without consciously deciding to go there. She stopped outside the door, listening. No sound from within. He was likely asleep, exhausted by travel and the evening's drama. She should go to her own bed, get what rest she could before morning brought fresh complications. But her hand was reaching for the door, pushing it open quietly, before the rational part of her mind could object. Inside, the fire had burned down to coals, painting the room in shades of amber and shadow. Jonathan was not asleep. He sat on one of the sleeping platforms, his back against the wall, staring at nothing. He looked up as she entered, surprise flickering across his face. I could not sleep, Erith said softly, closing the door behind her. I thought perhaps you could not either. No. Jonathan shifted slightly, making room, and Erith sat beside him, careful to maintain a proper distance. They were promised now in the eyes of her clan, but they were still strangers, still learning the shape of each other. Tell me about yourself, Erith said. Where are you from? What brought you to the borderlands? Jonathan was quiet for a moment, his gaze returning to the middle distance. I am from the east, he said finally. A town called Millbrook, 3 weeks' travel from here. I was a carpenter before the war. The border war, Erith asked. There had been skirmishes for years between the human kingdoms and the orc territories, raids and counter-raids that flared and subsided like a chronic illness. Yes, I was conscripted into the army 6 years ago when I was 19. Spent 3 years fighting battles I did not understand for causes I did not believe in. His voice was flat, factual, drained of emotion by repetition. I was injured in the last year, took a spear through the side, got an infection that nearly killed me. By the time I recovered enough to return to duty, the war had ended. They discharged me with a pittance and sent me home. But you did not stay home, Erith said gently. No, my parents had died while I was away. Sickness took them both within a month of each other. The carpenter I had apprenticed with had taken on someone else, had no room for me, and I found he stopped, swallowed. I found I could not settle, could not sleep in enclosed spaces, could not bear crowds or sudden noises, so I drifted west, looking for empty land and quiet. Found the farmstead by chance. The previous owner had died, and the land office was willing to let me work it if I could make it produce. Erith felt a fierce, protective anger rising in her chest at the casual injustice of it, at a world that could use a man until he broke and then discard him with nothing. "Can you make it produce?" she asked. "Maybe. The soil is poor, but I have learned some tricks. With enough time and effort, I might coax a living from it." He glanced at her, and something like humor touched his eyes. "Though I suppose my plans have changed somewhat." "Because of me," Erith said. "Because of you." They sat in silence, the fire popping softly, and Erith found herself studying his profile in the dim light. He had a good face, she decided. Not handsome in the way that turned heads, but honest, strong in its own quiet way. The face of someone who had endured and kept going. "My mother wants to meet you at breakfast tomorrow," she said. "Both my parents do, to take your measure, I suppose, to see what manner of man I have bound myself to. I will try not to disappoint them." "Just be yourself," Erith said. "That seems to have worked well enough so far." Jonathan turned to look at her fully, and the firelight caught the planes of his face, the shadows beneath his cheekbones, the surprising length of his lashes. "Why did you do it?" he asked quietly. "I have been asking myself that question all evening. I felt your strength. You could have beaten me as easily as you beat all the others. Why did you lose?" Erith took a breath, searching for words that would encompass the truth without sounding foolish. "Because you did not look at me like I was a prize to be won or a challenge to be conquered. You looked at me like I was a person, and when our hands met, I felt something I have not felt with anyone else, a rightness, a sense of possibility." She met his eyes. "And because I am tired of winning matches that do not matter, I wanted to try losing one that did." "You are taking a considerable risk on a stranger," Jonathan said. His voice was soft, wondering. "So are you. You are the one who has to live with the consequences of my choice." "I think I can manage that," Jonathan said, and there was warmth in his voice now, the first genuine warmth she had heard from him. It transformed his face, easing the lines of hardship, revealing the younger man he might have been without war and loss. Erith felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of tension she had not known she was carrying. "We will figure this out," she said, as much to herself as to him. "One day at a time, starting with breakfast and surviving my parents' interrogation." "I have faced worse," Jonathan said, and this time he was definitely joking, a hint of levity breaking through the exhaustion. "Have you faced my mother when she is determined to protect her daughter?" Erith asked. "She once made a traveling merchant cry simply by asking pointed questions about his prices." "Then I will have to be on my best behavior," Jonathan said solemnly, and Erith laughed, a real laugh that surprised them both. She stood reluctantly, knowing she should return to her own quarters but oddly reluctant to leave this warm, quiet space where the world's complications seemed temporarily held at bay. "Sleep well, Jonathan Ashford," she said. "Tomorrow will come early." "Sleep well, Erith Jorah," he replied, and she felt a flutter at hearing him say her name, at the way it sounded in his rough, quiet voice. She slipped back out into the night and made her way to her own small house, one of several built for adult children who remained in the clan compound. Inside, she stripped off her festival clothes and lay down beneath her furs, staring at the ceiling beams and replaying the evening's events in her mind. The weight of Jonathan's hand in hers, the look in his eyes when she let him win, the gasps of her clan, Gorak's challenge, Jonathan's lie. All of it tangling together into a knot she would spend the coming days unraveling. She slept eventually, and dreamed of arm-wrestling matches that transformed into dances, of a quiet man with sad eyes who smiled at her across a field of growing things. Morning came gray and cold, autumn asserting itself after several unseasonably warm days. Erith dressed carefully, choosing practical clothes rather than festival finery, and made her way to the guest house as the compound began stirring to life around her. She knocked softly and heard movement within before Jonathan opened the door. He had clearly made an effort, washing and combing his hair, brushing the dust from his clothes. The result was still poor by the standards of most suitors, but there was a dignity to it that Erith appreciated, a refusal to pretend he was something other than what he was. "Ready?" she asked. "As I will ever be," he said, and together they walked to her parents' house. Her mother had prepared a substantial meal: porridge with honey and dried fruit, fresh bread, smoked fish, and tea brewed from herbs gathered in the surrounding woods. It was more than they typically ate for breakfast, a display meant to demonstrate abundance and hospitality, even as it underscored the question of whether Jonathan could provide similarly for a family. Erith's father sat at the head of the table, her mother to his right, and Erith guided Jonathan to the seat across from them. She sat beside him, a deliberate statement of solidarity. Her father eyed Jonathan for a long moment, his expression unreadable, before gesturing to the food. "Eat," he said simply. They ate in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the clink of spoons and cups. Erith felt the tension winding tighter with each passing moment, waiting for the interrogation to begin. Finally, her mother set down her cup and fixed Jonathan with a steady gaze. "Erith tells us you are working a farmstead west of here," she said. "Yes, madam, a small holding about 60 acres, 15 of it cleared. That is a lot of land for one man to work." "It is," Jonathan admitted. "I will not pretend otherwise. I have been focusing on a garden plot and a small grain field, enough to feed myself and perhaps have a surplus to trade. Expanding beyond that will take time and help." "Help you do not have," Erith's father said bluntly. "Not yet, no." "What are your prospects?" her mother asked. "Be honest. Can you make a living from that land? Can you support a family?" Jonathan met her gaze directly, and Erith saw him make the decision not to dissemble or soften the truth. "I do not know. With luck and hard work, yes, but the land is marginal and I am starting with almost nothing. It will be a difficult few years at best. At worst, I will fail and we will have to find another way." The honesty seemed to surprise her parents. Erith saw her father's expression shift slightly, reassessing. "You could walk away," he said. "The trial result is binding, but traditions can be set aside by mutual agreement. If you feel this is too much, too complicated, you could leave. No one would blame you." "I would blame me," Jonathan said quietly. "Erith made a choice that has cost her dearly in terms of her clan's goodwill. Walking away now would make that sacrifice meaningless. I do not have much, but I have my word, and I give it to you now. I will do everything in my power to be worthy of her choice and to build a life we can both be proud of." Erith felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. Beside her, she heard her mother make a small noise, quickly stifled. Her father sat back in his chair, studying Jonathan with an intensity that would have made most men flinch. Jonathan bore it steadily, waiting. "You are not what I would have chosen for my daughter," Erith's father said finally. But you are honest and you have courage, and those are not small things. We will help you. Food stores, seed for spring, tools if you need them. You will not start from nothing. In return, I ask only that you treat her well and work hard. Can you do that?" "Yes," Jonathan said, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes, I can." "Then you have my blessing, such as it is," Erith's father said. He reached across the table, offering his hand, and Jonathan clasped it. The grip held for a moment, a silent exchange of understanding, and then they broke apart and returned to the meal. Conversation flowed more easily after that, her mother asking questions about Jonathan's carpentry skills and his plans for the farmstead, her father telling stories about the borderlands and the clan's history. Erith watched Jonathan relax by degrees, the wary tension leaving his shoulders, the occasional smile appearing. He was not effusive or charming, but he was genuine, and that seemed to be enough. They were finishing the meal when a knock sounded at the door. Erith's father frowned and called for the visitor to enter. The door opened to reveal one of Erith's cousins, a young man named Drog who served as a messenger for the clan elders. "Forgive the interruption," Drog said, his gaze flicking to Jonathan and away. "The council wishes to speak with Erith and the human. They have concerns about the trial result." Erith felt her stomach sink. The council was composed of the clan's eldest and most influential members, her father among them. If they had called a formal meeting, it meant the situation was being treated as a genuine issue requiring adjudication. "When?" her father asked. "Now, if possible. They are gathered at the council house." Erith exchanged a glance with Jonathan, seeing her own apprehension reflected in his eyes. "We will come," she said, standing. She touched her mother's shoulder in passing, a silent thank you for the meal and the tentative acceptance it represented, and led Jonathan out into the cold morning. The council house stood at the center of the compound, a large structure built of stone and timber with a high, peaked roof. Inside, a circular table dominated the space, surrounded by high-backed chairs. 7 of them were occupied now, the council members arrayed like judges, with one empty seat reserved for her father. At the far end of the circle, 2 plain stools had been set out. Erith and Jonathan were directed to sit on them, positioning them as supplicants rather than equals. Gorak stood off to one side, his arms folded, his expression smug. Erith felt anger flare and tamped it down. This was his doing, she was certain. He had gone to the council with his challenge, forcing a formal review. Her father entered and took his seat, his face carefully neutral. An older woman, Erith's great-aunt Vriska, leaned forward. She had been on the council for 30 years and her word carried weight. "Erith Jorah," Vriska said, her voice formal. "You stand before this council because your actions at the autumn gathering have raised questions about propriety and tradition. Do you understand why you have been called?" "I understand that some found my choice objectionable," Erith said carefully. "More than objectionable," Gorak interjected. "Unprecedented, shameful, a mockery of our ways. Gorak has brought his concerns to us," another council member, a grizzled warrior named Thrax, said, "and we cannot dismiss them entirely. The Suitor's trial is a sacred tradition. Deliberately losing such a trial subverts its purpose." "Does it?" Erith asked, keeping her voice level. "The purpose of the trial is to allow a woman to assess potential partners and make a choice based on her own judgment. I exercised that judgment. I chose." "You chose a human," Vriska said bluntly. "You chose an outsider with no ties to this clan, no history we can verify, no family to vouch for him. That choice has implications beyond your personal feelings." "What implications?" Erith asked. "That I might be happy, that I might build a life with someone I respect." "That you might bring instability to the clan," Thrax said. That you might bear children who do not fit cleanly into our world or theirs. That you might encourage others to make similar choices, fracturing the cohesion we have spent generations building. Jonathan stirred beside her, and Erith put a hand on his arm, warning him to remain silent. This was clan business, and his speaking would only worsen the situation. He subsided reluctantly, his jaw tight. Gorak has proposed a solution, Vriska said, her gaze moving to the big orc. He wishes to challenge the trial result by demanding a rematch. If you fight him again at full strength and win, it will prove that your loss to Jonathan was false, negating the declaration. If you refuse, or if you lose, the council will decide the matter based on what is best for the clan. It was a trap with no good exit. Erith felt the walls closing in, the weight of tradition and expectation crushing down on the fragile, improbable thing she was trying to build with Jonathan. She looked at her father, hoping for support, but his face remained carefully blank. He could not be seen to favor his daughter over the clan's interest. I refuse the rematch, Erith said clearly. My choice stands. Then you admit the loss was deliberate, Gorak said triumphantly. You admit you made a mockery of the tradition. I admit nothing except that I made a choice, Erith said. The tradition allows for that choice. It does not specify that every match must be fought to the fullest or that a woman cannot decide whom she wishes to favor. I hurt no one. I deceived no one. I simply exercised the agency the tradition grants me. You exercised poor judgment, Thrax said heavily. And now you ask us to support that judgment with the clan's blessing. I ask you to honor the traditions you claim to uphold, Erith shot back, her temper fraying. If the trial result can be overturned because you dislike the outcome, then the tradition is meaningless. It becomes a performance with a predetermined conclusion, and every woman who participates is reduced to a puppet acting out a script. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of unease spreading through the council. Several members shifted uncomfortably. Vriska's eyes narrowed, reassessing. You make a point, she said slowly, but it does not address the larger concern. This human is unknown to us. He could be a criminal, a deserter, a danger to the clan. We have no way to verify his character or his past. Then ask me, Jonathan said quietly. Every head turned toward him. He stood, moving slowly, and Erith saw him brace himself as though preparing for a blow. Ask me anything you wish to know. I will answer truthfully. Thrax leaned forward, his expression skeptical. Very well. What brought you to our territory? I am a veteran of the border war, Jonathan said. I was discharged after being injured and finding my home gone. I came west looking for empty land and a chance to start over. Why this land specifically? Vriska asked. No particular reason. I found the farmstead abandoned, and the land office in Greymore allowed me to file a claim. It seemed as good a place as any to try building a life. And what are your intentions toward Erith? Gorak demanded. What do you hope to gain from this arrangement? Jonathan turned to look at Erith, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. I hope to gain a partner, he said simply. Someone to share the work and the harvest, the hard times and the good ones. I did not come to the gathering looking for a wife, but life has a way of offering unexpected gifts. I intend to cherish this one if she will allow it. The words were plain, almost blunt, but the sincerity in them was unmistakable. Erith felt heat rise in her cheeks and knew she was blushing, green skin darkening to olive. Several council members exchanged glances. Even Gorak looked momentarily nonplussed. Pretty words, Thrax said, but his tone had lost some of its edge. Time will tell if they have substance. Vriska sat back in her chair, steepling her fingers. The council will deliberate, she said. You may wait outside. Erith and Jonathan rose and left the council house, stepping out into the cold morning. The compound was fully awake now, people moving about their business, though many paused to stare at the pair emerging from the council chamber. Erith led Jonathan to a bench near the communal well, out of the wind, and they sat in silence. "I am sorry," Jonathan said after a moment. "I never meant to bring so much trouble into your life." "You did not bring it," Erith said. "I chose it. There is a difference." "Is there?" If you had not entered the trial, I would still be sitting at that table, beating suitors I do not care about and pretending it was enough," Erith said fiercely. "You gave me an opportunity to choose differently. That is not a crime." Jonathan was quiet, his gaze fixed on the ground. "What will you do if they rule against us?" "I do not know," Erith admitted. "Leave the clan, perhaps. It would not be easy, but it has been done before. Or we could stay and endure their disapproval until they grow tired of objecting. Either way, I am not giving you up simply because it is inconvenient." He turned to look at her, surprise and something deeper, something tender in his expression. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Erith said. "I know you are brave and honest. I know you have been hurt and kept going. I know you stood before my entire clan and lied to protect me without hesitation. That is enough to build on." Jonathan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wished, and took her hand. His grip was warm, the scarred skin rough against her palm. "Then we will build," he said quietly. "Whatever comes, we will build." They sat like that, hands clasped, until the council house door opened and Drog emerged, gesturing for them to return. Erith squeezed Jonathan's hand once, then released it, and they walked back inside together. The council members' faces were unreadable, arranged in careful neutrality. Vriska spoke for them, her voice formal. "We have deliberated and reached a decision. Gorak's challenge is denied. The trial result stands as witnessed." Relief flooded through Erith so powerfully her knees went weak. Beside her, Jonathan let out a long, shaky breath, but Vriska was not finished. "However," she continued, "we are imposing conditions. Jonathan Ashford, you will remain on your farmstead for the winter. Erith may visit, but she will not formally leave this clan or join your household until the spring. This will give both of you time to determine if your choice is sustainable, and give us time to observe your character through those who trade in the area. If by the first thaw both parties still wish to proceed, we will hold a formal bonding ceremony. If either party wishes to withdraw, they may do so without penalty or shame. Do you accept these terms?" It was a compromise, Erith realized. A way for the council to honor the tradition while also protecting the clan's interests. It was not ideal, but it was better than she had feared. She looked at Jonathan, saw him nod slightly, and turned back to Vriska. "We accept," she said. "Then this matter is concluded," Vriska said. "Gorak, your challenge has been heard and answered. Let there be no further contest on this issue." Gorak's face was mottled with rage, but he dipped his head in reluctant acknowledgement. "As the council wills," he said through gritted teeth, and stalked from the chamber. Erith and Jonathan were dismissed with formal thanks for their cooperation, and they stepped out into the daylight once more. This time, the weight that had been pressing down on Erith's shoulders was gone, replaced by a buoyant, almost giddy sense of possibility. "We did it," she said, barely above a whisper. "We actually did it." "You did it," Jonathan corrected. "I just tried not to make things worse." "You did more than that." Erith turned to him, emboldened by relief and joy and the simple fact that she had chosen this man and the clan had accepted it, however grudgingly. "You stood with me. You spoke for me. That is not nothing." Jonathan's expression softened, and he lifted one hand to touch her cheek, a feather-light brush of fingertips against green skin. "Where do we go from here?" he asked. I suppose we should go to your farm, Erith said practically. I need to see what we are working with. And if I am going to be visiting all winter, I should know the way. It is a hard ride, Jonathan warned. 10 miles through rough country and the farmstead as well, it is not much. I did not expect much, Erith said. I expected you, and that is enough. Show me. They gathered supplies from Erith's house and from the communal stores, her parents contributing food and warm clothes without fuss now that the council had spoken. Her father pulled Jonathan aside for a brief, private conversation while Erith finished packing, and when they rejoined her, both men looked more settled, some understanding reached. Jonathan had a borrowed horse, a sturdy mare past her prime but reliable, and Erith saddled her own gelding, a gray with a calm temperament. They left the compound in the early afternoon, riding west through rolling hills covered in autumn grass. The weather held clear and cold, perfect traveling conditions, and Erith found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the ride. Jonathan led the way, following a track that was barely visible in places, winding between thickets of scrub oak and across shallow streams. He rode well, she noticed, with the easy seat of someone who had spent time in the saddle, though his posture suggested discomfort from his old injury. She did not comment, respecting his pride, but filed the observation away for later consideration. If they were to build a life together, she would need to know his limits as well as his strengths. They stopped once to rest the horses and eat a cold meal of bread and cheese, sitting on a fallen log beside a creek. The world felt vast and empty around them, the frontier's characteristic solitude pressing in from all sides. It should have felt lonely, but instead Erith found it peaceful, a space where the clan's expectations and the world's judgments could not reach. You miss it? Jonathan asked, breaking the companionable silence. The compound, the people, the community? Not yet, Erith said honestly. But I will eventually. It is the place I have known all my life. These are the people who raised me. Even when they frustrate me, I love them. Will you be able to live apart from them? Even visiting often, it will not be the same as being there every day. Erith considered the question seriously, turning it over in her mind. I think so, she said finally. I have always been somewhat separate, even living among them. Being strong, being unbeaten, it set me apart. People admired me, but they also kept their distance. Perhaps living on the outside will feel less different than it should. Jonathan nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without need for further words. They finished their meal and continued, the sun sinking lower in the sky as they traveled. As dusk approached, the landscape changed, the hills giving way to flatter ground, and Jonathan pointed ahead to where a thin line of smoke rose against the dimming sky. There, he said. Home such as it is. Erith urged her horse forward, eager despite herself, and as they crested a low rise, the farmstead came into view. It was, as Jonathan had warned, not much. A small cabin, perhaps 20 feet square, built of rough logs with a sod roof. A barn that was more shed than proper structure, leaning slightly to one side. A well with a wooden cover. Beyond them, perhaps 3 acres of cleared land, the stubble of harvested grain showing pale against the dark earth. The rest was wilderness, scrub and grass stretching away in all directions. But there was something appealing about it, too. The cabin sat in a slight depression, sheltered from the worst winds with a line of trees to the north providing additional protection. The well was centrally placed, convenient to both house and field. The barn, though rickety, would keep animals dry. It was a beginning, a foundation on which something more could be built. It needs work, Jonathan said, his voice tight with embarrassment or anxiety or both. I know it does. The roof leaks in 2 places, and the barn needs to be reinforced before winter truly sets in, and the field should be larger if we are going to grow enough to live on." "It is fine," Erith interrupted, dismounting and handing him her reins. "It is a start. That is all we need." They stabled the horses in the barn, Erith noting with approval that Jonathan had laid in a good store of hay and that the animals had clean water. Then they carried their supplies to the cabin, and Jonathan opened the door to reveal the interior. One room, as she had expected, with a stone fireplace at one end, a sleeping platform built into the opposite wall, a rough table with 2 chairs, and shelves holding a sparse collection of dishes and tools. A few personal items were visible: a whetstone, a carving half-finished, a battered book with no title visible on the spine. It was clean, she noticed, scrupulously so, and organized with a precision that suggested military training. "I will sleep in the barn," Jonathan said quickly. "While you are here, I mean. It would not be proper to share the cabin until after the bonding ceremony." Erith appreciated the consideration, even as part of her was disappointed. She had not expected him to presume, but there was something lonely about the idea of sleeping in separate structures when they were already bound in all but the final formality. "That seems wise," she said aloud. "We should follow the proprieties, especially with the clan watching." Jonathan nodded, visibly relieved, and set about lighting the fire and preparing a simple meal. Erith helped, learning the layout of his limited supplies, asking questions about his routines and his plans. They fell into an easy rhythm, passing dishes and utensils, working around each other in the small space. It felt domestic, Erith thought, and surprisingly pleasant. They ate as darkness fell, talking sporadically about practical matters. The field would need to be prepared for spring planting. The barn truly did need repairs before heavy snow arrived. The cabin could be expanded, perhaps, adding a second room or a proper loft. There was a market town, Graymore, about 15 miles south, where they could trade for things they could not make themselves. After the meal, Jonathan excused himself and retreated to the barn, carrying a bedroll and a lantern. Erith banked the fire and lay down on the sleeping platform, wrapped in furs that smelled of smoke and woodlands. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind outside, and felt a complex tangle of emotions: excitement at the new beginning, apprehension about the challenges ahead, loneliness in the quiet darkness. And beneath it all, a steady, growing certainty that she had made the right choice, regardless of how difficult the path might prove. She woke to gray dawn light and the smell of cooking. Confused, she sat up and saw that Jonathan had already risen, built up the fire, and started breakfast. He glanced over as she stirred, his expression uncertain. "I hope I did not wake you," he said. "I am accustomed to rising early." "It is fine," Erith said, climbing from the platform and stretching. "I should get used to your rhythms if we are to make this work." They ate together, porridge sweetened with honey, and then Jonathan led her on a tour of the property, showing her the extent of the clearing, the water sources, the places where he had seen deer, and where he thought a vegetable garden might thrive. Erith listened and asked questions, her practical mind cataloging the possibilities and problems. The barn repairs became their first project. Jonathan had the necessary tools and materials, salvaged from the remains of a collapsed outbuilding, and together they set to work shoring up the sagging wall and replacing rotted boards. Erith had experience with construction from helping her clan maintain their buildings, and her strength made the heavy lifting easier. They worked well together, she noticed, Jonathan planning and measuring while she provided the muscle, a natural division of labor that maximized their respective skills. By midday, the barn stood straight and secure, and they broke for a meal of bread and dried meat. Jonathan seemed more relaxed now, the initial awkwardness fading as they settled into the work. He even smiled once, a real smile that transformed his face, when Erith made a wry comment about the barn's previous owner being either very optimistic or very foolish to think such a structure would survive a frontier winter. "I think he was simply tired," Jonathan said. "The land office said he had been here 5 years, working alone. That wears a person down, makes you take shortcuts you know better than to take. You have been here less than a season and have already improved things considerably," Erith pointed out. "That suggests you have more stamina or more sense than your predecessor. Or more reason to try," Jonathan said quietly, meeting her eyes. The moment stretched between them, weighted with meaning, and then he looked away, clearing his throat. "We should check the roof next. I patched the leaks, but I would like your opinion on whether the work will hold." They climbed onto the cabin's low roof, Jonathan boosting Erith up, and then pulling himself after her with a grimace of effort. Erith examined the patches, testing the tightness of the sod and the placement of the logs. The work was sound, she decided, adequate for the winter if not elegant. "It will hold," she said. "But come spring, we should consider replacing the entire roof. A proper thatched or shingled roof would be more weatherproof and last longer." "We," Jonathan repeated softly. "You keep saying we." "Because that is what we are now," Erith said, turning to face him. The roof was small, bringing them close together, and she could see the fine details of his face, the gray threading his dark hair at the temples, the small scar on his chin, the way his eyes reflected the pale autumn sky. "A partnership. A team. You and me against the world's problems, however large or small they prove to be." Jonathan reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and warm. "I am still trying to understand why you chose me," he admitted. "I keep thinking I will wake up and find it was a dream or a mistake." "It was neither," Erith said. "It was a choice, made with open eyes and a willing heart. You may not understand it, but I hope you will come to accept it." "I am trying," Jonathan said. "Every moment I spend with you, it becomes easier to believe that this is real, that you are real. That someone like you could look at someone like me and see something worth keeping." Erith felt her heart twist at the raw vulnerability in his voice. She lifted her free hand and placed it on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "You are worth keeping," she said fiercely. "You are brave and kind and honest. You work hard and do not complain. You protect those who matter to you even when it costs you. Those are not small things. Those are the things that matter." Jonathan's hand came up to cover hers, pressing it more firmly against his chest. "I will try to be worthy of your faith in me," he said. "I promise you that." "You already are," Erith said. And then, because the moment felt right and because she had never been one to wait for permission, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was a gentle kiss, tentative, a question more than a statement. Jonathan froze for an instant, surprise locking his muscles, and then he responded, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek as he kissed her back. His lips were chapped from wind and weather, his touch careful as though he feared breaking something precious. Erith felt warmth bloom in her chest, spreading through her body like spring sunlight, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I have been wanting to do that since the trial," Erith admitted, her voice unsteady. "I have been wanting you to," Jonathan said, wonder in his voice. "I did not think I was allowed." "You are allowed anything I offer freely," Erith said. "We are promised, Jonathan. The formalities can wait until spring, but in every way that matters we are already bound. Do you understand?" "Yes," Jonathan said, and kissed her again, less tentative this time, more certain. They stood on the cabin roof in the cold autumn air and kissed like young lovers discovering each other for the first time, and Erith thought that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The days settled into a pattern after that. Erith rose early, helping Jonathan with the morning chores, and they worked together on various projects improving the farmstead. They reinforced the chicken coop Jonathan had built and filled it with birds purchased from a traveling trader. They split and stacked firewood until they had enough to see them through the winter with a margin for safety. They dug a root cellar beside the cabin, lining it with stone and fitting it with a heavy door, and filled it with provisions contributed by Erith's parents and purchased in Graymore. Every evening they ate together by firelight, talking about the day's work or sharing stories from their pasts. Erith told him about growing up in the clan, about her childhood fascination with strength and competition, about her complicated relationship with tradition and expectation. Jonathan spoke more hesitantly, but gradually his history emerged. A happy childhood shadowed by his father's death when Jonathan was 12. Apprenticeship to the carpenter, learning a trade he loved. The war, which he spoke of in fragments, brief glimpses of horror that he could not quite articulate. The long, painful recovery from his injury. The rootless years that followed, drifting without purpose or plan. "I think I had stopped believing I could have anything good," he said one evening, staring into the fire. "The war taught me to expect loss, expect pain, expect things to be taken away the moment you started to care about them. And then you looked at me across that table and something in me woke up, some part I thought was dead. It terrified me." "Does it still terrify you?" Erith asked gently. "Yes," Jonathan admitted, "but less now. Now it is more like standing at the edge of something vast and unknown. Frightening, but also exhilarating." Erith reached across the space between them and took his hand. They sat like that often now, touching casually, learning the comfort of physical closeness. "I am frightened too," she confessed. "I have never done this before. Never tried to build something with another person. What if I am terrible at it? What if I fail you?" "Then we will fail together and try again," Jonathan said simply. "That is what partnership means, is it not?" It was, and the simplicity of his acceptance eased some of Erith's anxiety. They were both new at this, both learning, and that made them equals in a way that mattered more than physical strength or social standing. As the days shortened and the cold deepened, Erith found herself falling into a comfortable rhythm. She would spend several days at the farmstead, working alongside Jonathan, and then return to the clan compound for a few days to maintain her connections there and report to the council as required. Each departure felt harder, and each return to the farmstead felt more like coming home. Her parents visited once, making the ride out to inspect the situation and satisfy themselves that their daughter was safe and well treated. Her mother walked through the cabin, examining everything with a critical eye, while her father spoke with Jonathan outside, their voices low and serious. When they left, her mother hugged Erith tightly and whispered, "He is good for you. I see it in your face. You are happier than I have seen you in years." Not all the visits from the clan were so positive. Gorak appeared one afternoon, riding up to the farmstead with 2 companions, ostensibly to check that the borders between orc lands and human lands were being respected. He made a show of surveying the property, noting the cleared land and the improvements with sneering disapproval. "You have settled for scraps," he said to Erith, loud enough for Jonathan to hear. "A hovel in the wilderness when you could have had a proper home." "I have a home," Erith said coldly, "and a partner who respects me. That is more than you ever offered." Gorak's face darkened. "He has bewitched you somehow, made you forget your pride, your strength, your heritage. When you come to your senses and realize what you have thrown away, do not expect me to take you back." "I will not," Erith said, "because I am not throwing anything away. I am building something new, and your approval is not required." Gorak looked as though he wanted to say more, perhaps to escalate the confrontation into violence, but Jonathan had emerged from the barn carrying an axe. He was not threatening with it, merely holding it as though he had been in the middle of chopping wood, but his presence and the implicit message were enough to give Gorak pause. "You should leave," Jonathan said quietly. "You have made your inspection. You have said your piece. There is nothing more for you here." Gorak stared at him with naked hatred, but he mounted his horse and rode away, his companions following. Jonathan set the axe aside and came to stand beside Erith, his hand finding hers. "Will he cause more trouble?" Jonathan asked. "Probably," Erith said. "But we will handle it when it comes. We always do." The first snow fell in early November, a light dusting that melted by noon but signaled the change in seasons. Jonathan became more focused, checking and rechecking their supplies, ensuring that the animals were secure and that the cabin was truly weatherproof. Erith appreciated his thoroughness, but she also saw the tension in him, the way he watched the sky as though expecting disaster. "What worries you?" she asked one evening as they sat together mending tack. "Winter," Jonathan said simply. "In the army, winter was when men died, not from battle but from cold and hunger and sickness. I know we are prepared, but the fear is still there, waiting." "We are well stocked," Erith said. "We have food, fuel, warm clothes, and we have each other. That is more than most people have." Jonathan nodded, but the worry did not entirely leave his eyes. That night, Erith lay awake in the cabin while Jonathan slept in the barn, and she made a decision. The next morning, she announced that she was staying through the winter rather than returning to the clan. "The council said I could visit, but they did not forbid me from staying," she said when Jonathan protested. "And it makes no sense to travel back and forth through snow and ice when I could be here helping you. We can both visit the compound for festivals and to resupply, but otherwise, I am staying." "What about propriety?" Jonathan asked. "You sleeping in the cabin and me in the barn, that works for short visits, but for an entire winter, then we will both sleep in the cabin," Erith said firmly. "In separate beds if that makes you more comfortable, but under the same roof. I am not letting you freeze out there while I hoard the fire." Jonathan looked torn, propriety warring with practicality and, she suspected, a deep loneliness he had been carrying for years. Finally, he nodded. "Separate beds," he said, "until the bonding ceremony. After that things can change." They built a second sleeping platform on the opposite wall, and that night, for the first time, they shared the cabin's warmth. Erith lay on her furs and listened to Jonathan breathing across the room, a steady rhythm that was oddly comforting. The cabin felt less empty, more alive with both of them in it. The deep winter set in, and the days became a cycle of survival and maintenance. They fed the chickens and the horses, chopped ice from the well, repaired equipment damaged by cold and use. When the weather allowed, they hunted, Jonathan's skill with a bow supplementing their stores with fresh meat. Erith learned to cook properly, moving beyond the simple meals she had prepared in her own house to more complex dishes that made their limited ingredients stretch further. They talked endlessly, filling the long dark evenings with stories and ideas and dreams. Jonathan taught her to carve, guiding her hands as she shaped soft wood into simple figures. She taught him clan songs, her voice rough but enthusiastic as she worked through the old ballads. They played strategy games with stones and a board Jonathan made, and she discovered he had a subtle, strategic mind that could outmaneuver her brute force approaches more often than not. And gradually, inevitably, they grew closer. The physical separation of the two sleeping platforms began to feel artificial. a formality they maintained more from habit than conviction. They would sit together by the fire, his arm around her shoulders or her head resting against his chest, and the line between companionship and something deeper blurred until it was nearly invisible. One night in deep January, when the wind howled outside and the cabin felt like the only warm spot in a frozen world, Jonathan looked at her across the firelight and said, "I love you." The words hung in the air, simple and profound. Erith felt her breath catch, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You do not have to say that," she whispered. "You do not have to feel obligated." "I am not obligated," Jonathan interrupted. "I am terrified and overwhelmed and confused about 100 things, but I am not obligated." "I love you, Erith Jorah. I have been falling in love with you since the moment you let me win that match, and I do not think I can hold it in any longer." Erith crossed the space between them in 2 strides and kissed him with all the pent-up emotion of the past months. Jonathan responded instantly, his arms coming around her, pulling her close as the kiss deepened. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Erith pressed her forehead to his. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have from the beginning. I looked at you and felt something wake up in me, something that had been sleeping my entire life, and every day since has only made it stronger." "The bonding ceremony is not until spring," Jonathan said, his voice rough with want and restraint. "I know." Erith pulled back slightly, looking into his eyes. "And we will wait because we said we would, because propriety matters to you. But Jonathan, you should know that in my heart I am already yours. The ceremony will just make it official." "In my heart I have been yours since the trial," Jonathan said. "You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me a future when I thought there was only emptiness ahead. However long I live, I will never be able to repay that." "You do not have to repay anything," Erith said fiercely. "This is not a debt. This is a gift we are giving each other. Love freely offered and freely accepted." They held each other as the fire burned low, and eventually Erith returned to her own sleeping platform, but the distance felt different now. Not a separation, but a temporary delay, a promise waiting to be fulfilled. The winter passed in a haze of work and warmth and growing certainty. They made plans for spring, discussing how to expand the fields, what crops to plant, whether to acquire more livestock. Jonathan sketched out designs for additions to the cabin, a second room and a proper loft, and Erith calculated the materials they would need. It was domestic and ordinary and utterly wonderful, a future taking shape in their hands. In late February, they made the trek to the clan compound for the spring festival preparation gathering. The ride took 2 days through snow-choked paths, and they arrived cold and exhausted, but together. Erith's parents welcomed them warmly, and her mother took one look at Erith's face and smiled knowingly. "So it is settled then," she said. "You have decided you can live together." "Yes," Erith said simply. "We have decided." The clan's attitude had shifted during the winter, skepticism giving way to grudging acceptance as word filtered back that the farmstead was thriving, and that Erith seemed genuinely happy. Even the council, when Erith and Jonathan appeared before them to confirm their intention to proceed with the bonding ceremony, offered congratulations along with their formal approval. Only Gorak remained hostile, watching from the edges of gatherings with barely concealed fury. Erith tried to ignore him, focusing instead on the preparations for the ceremony. Her mother and aunts helped her select the traditional bonding clothes, a dress of soft leather dyed deep blue and decorated with intricate beadwork. Jonathan was measured for his own outfit, a simple but well-made tunic and trousers that honored both human and orc aesthetic sensibilities. The ceremony was set for the spring equinox, a traditional time for bondings as it symbolized balance and new beginnings. In the weeks leading up to it, Erith and Jonathan split their time between the farmstead and the compound, fulfilling both the practical need to tend the farm and the social need to involve the clan in the coming celebration. One evening, a week before the ceremony, Erith and Jonathan walked the perimeter of the compound, seeking a moment of privacy away from the constant attention of family and friends. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant overhead and their breath plumed white in the air. "Are you nervous?" Erith asked. "Terrified," Jonathan admitted. "I will be standing before your entire clan, committing myself publicly to a life I still sometimes cannot believe is real. Yes, I am nervous." "What if I promise not to let you fall?" Erith said, taking his hand. "You cannot promise that." "Life is uncertain. People fall all the time." "Then I promise to catch you if you do," Erith amended, "to be there always through whatever comes. Is that better?" Jonathan stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. "I promise the same," he said. "To stand with you, to work beside you, to build a life with you however hard the road becomes. I may not be strong like you or connected like you, but I am steady. I will be your constant." "That is all I need," Erith said, and kissed him there in the starlight, sealing the promise between them. The night before the ceremony, as tradition dictated, they slept apart, Jonathan in the guest house and Erith in her family home. Her mother came to sit with her as she prepared for bed, brushing out Erith's dark hair with long, gentle strokes. "Tomorrow you become a wife," her mother said softly. "It is a strange thing to realize. I still think of you as my little girl, the one who climbed trees and wrestled with boys twice her size." "I am still that girl," Erith said, "just grown and choosing a different kind of challenge." "Marriage is indeed a challenge," her mother agreed. "But it is also a joy when you find the right person. I think you have found yours." "I think so too," Erith said. "He is nothing like what I expected, but he is everything I needed." Her mother set down the brush and hugged her tightly. "Be happy, my daughter. That is all I have ever wanted for you." Erith slept fitfully, excitement and nervousness warring in her chest. She woke before dawn and lay in the darkness, thinking about the day ahead and the life that would follow. Then the household began to stir, and there was no more time for introspection, only the rush of preparation. Her mother and aunts helped her dress, fastening the intricate ties of the bonding dress and arranging her hair in the traditional braided crown. They painted her face with ceremonial marks in white clay, symbols of strength and fertility and commitment. When they finally let her see her reflection in a polished bronze mirror, Erith barely recognized herself. She looked regal, powerful, and somehow softer than usual, as though happiness had smoothed the hard edges of her features. The ceremony would take place at midday in the central gathering space, the same clearing where the autumn trial had been held. As Erith walked toward it, her family surrounding her in a protective cluster, she saw that the entire clan had turned out, along with a number of guests from neighboring territories. The space was decorated with ribbons and early spring flowers, and at the center, beneath an arch woven from willow branches, Jonathan waited. He wore his new clothes with obvious discomfort, unused to such finery, but he stood straight and met her eyes as she approached. Erith saw wonder in his face and love and a vulnerability that made her heart ache. He was offering himself, all of himself, before this crowd of strangers and potential critics, trusting that she would honor what he was giving. She took her place across from him beneath the arch, their hands joining as Vriska stepped forward to officiate. The old woman's voice carried clearly across the silent crowd as she spoke the traditional words, asking each of them in turn if they came freely, if they understood the commitment, if they would honor each other through all the seasons of life. "I will," Erith said clearly when her turn came. "I will," Jonathan echoed, his voice steady despite the tremor she could feel in his hands. Vriska bound their wrists together with a braided cord, symbolizing their joining, and spoke the final blessing. "Before clan and earth and sky, I declare you bonded. What has been joined here, let no one separate. May your lives be long, your harvest abundant, and your love enduring." The crowd erupted into cheers and applause, and Jonathan pulled Erith close, kissing her deeply as the sound washed over them. Erith felt tears on her cheeks and did not know if they were hers or his or both. It did not matter. They were married now, bound in every way that mattered, and the future stretched before them bright with possibility. The celebration lasted well into the night, feasting and music and dancing beneath the early stars. Erith and Jonathan were toasted repeatedly, well-wishers pressing gifts and advice upon them with enthusiasm and varying degrees of helpfulness. Her father made a speech that was equal parts sentimental and stern, reminding them that marriage was work as well as joy. Her mother wept openly, happiness and sorrow mingling as she watched her daughter step fully into adulthood. Even Gorak approached, though he did not offer congratulations. He stood before them, his face hard, and said simply, "You have made your choice. I will respect the bonding, but do not expect my friendship or my help." "I never did," Erith said coolly, "but thank you for your honesty." Gorak nodded once and walked away, and Erith felt a weight lift from her shoulders. His hostility would likely continue, but it no longer mattered. She had what she wanted, and his approval was irrelevant. As the night wore on, and the celebration began to wind down, Erith and Jonathan slipped away to the guest house, which had been prepared for them as a bonding night retreat. Someone had filled it with flowers and laid fresh furs on the sleeping platform, and a fire burned warm and welcoming in the hearth. They stood in the center of the small room, suddenly shy despite the months of growing intimacy, and Jonathan laughed softly at the absurdity of it. "We have spent an entire winter sleeping in the same room," he said. "Why does this feel so different?" "Because now it is real in a way it was not before," Erith said. "Before we were promised, now we are bound. The difference matters." Jonathan crossed to her and took her hands, his touch gentle. "I do not want you to feel pressured," he said quietly. "Tonight or any night, we move at whatever pace feels right to you." Erith felt a rush of love so intense it was almost painful. "I want this," she said. "I want you. I have wanted you since I let you win that match, and I have been waiting for permission to claim you fully. That permission is now given, by tradition and by my own heart. So stop being noble and kiss your wife." Jonathan grinned, the expression transforming his face, and did as she commanded. They came together with a hunger born of months of restraint, and the night unfolded around them, warm and private and wholly theirs. Morning came too soon, pale light filtering through the gaps in the shutters. Erith woke to find herself wrapped around Jonathan, his arm beneath her head, his breathing deep and even. She studied his sleeping face, memorizing the details, the small imperfections that made him real. His eyes opened as she watched, and he smiled sleepily. "Good morning, wife," he said, testing out the word. "Good morning, husband," Erith replied, and the rightness of it sang through her. They rose eventually, dressing and emerging to face the aftermath of the celebration. The compound was quiet, most people sleeping off the previous night's indulgence, but Erith's mother was already up, directing the cleanup with her usual efficiency. She saw them and smiled, a private, knowing expression that needed no words. They stayed at the compound for 2 more days, accepting final gifts and well wishes, and then made ready to return to the farmstead. This time, however, they were not traveling as individuals but as a unit, a family of two beginning their life together. The shift felt both subtle and profound, as though the world had rearranged itself around their changed status. The ride back was cold but clear, and as the farmstead came into view, Erith felt a swell of pride and affection. It was rough and small and isolated, but it was theirs, built by their hands and claimed by their choice. Jonathan helped her dismount, and they stood together in the yard, surveying their domain. "What do you want to do first?" Jonathan asked. "Fix the chicken coop," Erith said practically. "One of the boards was loose last time I checked, and if a fox gets in, we will lose half the flock." Jonathan laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Ever practical. Very well, we will start with the chickens." They worked through the afternoon, falling back into the rhythm they had established over the winter. As the sun began to set, they went inside and prepared a simple meal, eating together at the rough table. The domesticity of it, the ordinariness, felt like a gift after the high drama of the ceremony. "You regret it?" Jonathan asked as they cleaned up. "Any of it? The choice, the challenge, the leaving your clan?" Erith considered the question seriously, looking inward for any trace of doubt or regret. She found none. "No," she said. "I do not regret it. This is harder than staying would have been, and it will likely get harder still, but I chose it freely and I would choose it again." "You are worth the difficulty." Jonathan set down the dish he was washing and crossed to her, pulling her into an embrace. "I will spend my life trying to be worthy of that," he said against her hair. "You already are," Erith said, and believed it completely. The seasons turned, spring giving way to summer. They planted the fields, Jonathan teaching Erith the principles of crop rotation and soil management he had learned from trial and error. The work was back-breaking, dawn to dusk labor that left them exhausted and filthy. But the sight of green shoots emerging from the dark earth filled them both with satisfaction. In late spring, Erith discovered she was pregnant. The realization came gradually, missed cycles and morning nausea coalescing into certainty. She told Jonathan one evening as they sat outside watching the sunset, and he went very still, processing the news. "A baby," he said finally, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," Erith confirmed. She felt a complex tangle of emotions herself, joy and fear and excitement all wound together. In late autumn, most likely, before the first snow. Jonathan turned to her, his face alight with an emotion she could not quite name. "This is more than I ever dreamed of having," he said. "A wife, a home, and now a child. I do not know what I did to deserve this." "You were brave enough to try," Erith said simply. "That is all any of us can do." They shared the news with her clan on their next visit, and the reaction was enthusiastic. Her mother hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face, and began immediately making plans for what the baby would need. Her father clapped Jonathan on the shoulder, offering gruff congratulations and advice about preparing for fatherhood. Even the council, when informed, offered blessings and a promise of support. The pregnancy progressed steadily through the summer, Erith adjusting to the changes in her body with pragmatic acceptance. She continued working as long as she was able, stubbornly refusing to be treated as fragile even as Jonathan fussed and worried. They completed the cabin expansion, adding a second room that would serve as a nursery, and filled it with a cradle Jonathan carved by hand and blankets Erith's mother sewed. In mid-October, as the leaves turned gold and red and the air took on an autumn chill, Erith went into labor. Jonathan sent word to the clan, and her mother arrived within hours, bringing 2 experienced midwives. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the following day, and there were moments when Erith wondered if she had the strength to finish. But Jonathan stayed beside her the entire time, holding her hand, offering water and encouragement, and his steadiness anchored her through the worst of it. The baby was born at dawn, a healthy girl with a lusty cry and skin that was a beautiful blend of green-tinged olive, neither fully orc nor fully human, but something new and holy herself. They named her Marissa, and when Jonathan held her for the first time, Erith saw tears streaming down his face. "She is perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect. She is ours," Erith said, exhausted but content. "That makes her perfect." The weeks after Marissa's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings, but Erith found she did not mind. Her daughter was a miracle, a tangible proof of the life she and Jonathan were building, and every moment with her felt precious. Jonathan proved to be a devoted father, rising for night feedings despite having to work the following day, singing soft lullabies in his rough voice as he walked Marissa through the cabin to soothe her crying. The clan visited frequently, her parents especially, and each time they marveled at how much Marissa had grown, how alert she was, how clearly she showed traits from both her parents. There were difficult moments, too. Visits from clan members who stared at the baby with thinly veiled disapproval, or made comments about the challenges she would face as a child of two worlds. Erith handled these with as much grace as she could muster, reminding herself that fear and prejudice were often born of ignorance, and that Marissa would teach people, simply by existing, to be better. Winter settled in again, and the small family hunkered down in their cabin. The second winter was easier than the first, their stores better managed, their systems more efficient. They took turns caring for Marissa, trading off so the other could rest or work, and slowly they found a balance that worked. One evening in deep winter, with Marissa asleep in her cradle and a blizzard howling outside, Erith and Jonathan sat by the fire wrapped in a shared blanket. They had been quiet for some time, simply enjoying each other's presence, when Jonathan spoke. "I never thought I would be happy again," he said softly. "After the war, after losing my family, I was certain that part of my life was over, and then you looked at me across that table and changed everything." "You changed my life too," Erith said. "You gave me permission to choose something different, to step outside the path everyone expected me to follow. I will always be grateful for that." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not entered the trial?" Jonathan asked. "If I had stayed in the traders section, too afraid to try, I wonder," Erith admitted. "But only in an abstract way. It feels inevitable now, as though everything was leading to that moment. You were supposed to enter the trial. I was supposed to let you win. We were supposed to find each other." "Fate," Jonathan said, a note of humor in his voice. "Or luck," Erith countered. "Or simple chance. Does it matter which?" "I suppose not," Jonathan said. He tightened his arm around her and she leaned into his warmth. "What matters is that we are here together and that we have built something real." From the cradle, Marissa made a small noise, a contented coo in her sleep, and they both looked over at her. Erith felt a profound sense of peace settle over her, a bone-deep certainty that this, exactly this, was where she was meant to be. The years flowed forward from there, each season bringing its own challenges and joys. A second daughter, Elaine, arrived when Marissa was 2, and the cabin rang with the sounds of children playing and crying and laughing. Jonathan built an addition to house the growing family, and Erith expanded the garden until they were producing far more than they needed, trading the surplus in Greymore for tools and luxuries. The farmstead prospered, slowly but steadily. Word spread about the orc woman and human man who had defied expectations to build a life together, and their story took on a legendary quality. embellished and retold until it bore only passing resemblance to the truth. Some versions cast them as romantic heroes, others as cautionary tales, but all agreed that what they had done was remarkable. More significantly, their example quietly began to shift attitudes, a slow erosion of the barriers between orc and human. Other mixed couples began appearing, tentatively at first, emboldened by the fact that Erith and Jonathan had survived the scandal and emerged stronger. It was not a revolution, but it was a beginning, and that mattered. Through it all, Erith and Jonathan remained partners in every sense. They worked the land together, raised their children together, faced setbacks and celebrated victories together. Their love, forged in that moment of connection across an arm-wrestling table, deepened and matured, becoming the bedrock upon which their entire lives were built. One autumn evening, many years after the trial, Erith stood in the doorway of their expanded cabin watching the sun set over fields heavy with harvest. Behind her, she could hear Jonathan reading to Marissa and Elaine, his voice rising and falling with the rhythm of the story. The sound filled her with contentment, a deep satisfaction that came from knowing she had made the right choice all those years ago. She thought about the girl she had been, unbeaten and restless, searching for something she could not name. She thought about the quiet man who had stepped forward with nothing but courage and hope. And she thought about everything they had built together from that improbable beginning. A hand touched her shoulder, and Jonathan appeared beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How lucky we are," Erith said simply. "How one moment of courage can change everything." "My courage or yours?" Jonathan asked, a smile in his voice. "Both," Erith said. "Mine to choose differently and yours to accept what I offered." They stood together in the doorway, watching the light fade from the sky, and Erith knew with absolute certainty that she would make the same choice again, in any world, in any circumstance. Jonathan was her partner, her love, her home, and that was more than enough. That was everything.